Every story has a beginning, middle, and end, and sometimes those stories aren't just one film. Movie trilogies are great, taking characters on a grand journey over the course of 3 films, or being unrelated in story but keeping similar things like a consistent tone or the same actors. This is what we'll be discussing today. Ones that nail it, ones that have a dud or two, some that are confined within a larger universe, and some that actually never make it to 3. Sometimes they're cash grabs to get more money out of a popular franchise, sometimes they're filmmakers trying to tell one long narrative, or sometimes they're just doing what their source did. If you like this video, hit like and subscribe. It tells YouTube and me that you want more content just like this. Let's start this video on a positive note and talk about the Why not get started with the Evil Dead trilogy? The 3 original Sam Raimi directed movies make a pretty good pack. The first one is a pioneer in the cabin in the woods genre of horror with very impressive effects on a budget of under $400,000. It takes itself pretty seriously with a few comedic elements before being followed up with Evil Dead 2, which is almost kind of a soft reboot or light continuation of the previous one, but with effects that ramp up the campiness to 11. It's non-stop wacky horror comedy that's only rivaled by the 3rd movie, which is the period piece that has so many standout moments. 3 out of 3. Speaking of Sam Raimi, his Spider-Man movies are 3 incredible movies, which I know might be a controversial opinion considering that the 3rd one gets a bad rep. Yeah, there was clear executive meddling by Sony, but I think Raimi did the best he could with what was forced into the movie, and it's a real enjoyable mess, especially nowadays when blockbusters have more studio interference than ever and don't do nearly as good a job as Spider-Man 3 does. And besides that one, the other 2 movies are pretty solid, and I love how consistent and lived in the universe feels. It makes for an easy rewatch. The second one is one of my favorite comic book movies of all time because it feels like it's putting character first before anything while still having amazing action. 3 out of 3. Let's talk about the Back to the Future trilogy. Certainly another iconic one because of how easygoing it is. Time travel stories are very difficult to nail because of how complex the mechanics can get, but this one really is easy to pick up on. So you can sit back and watch the shenanigans of Marty and Doc without worrying too much. The 3rd one is probably my least favorite, but the western setting and the ending is good enough to where I wouldn't call it a dud. 3 out of 3. Other good examples are the Cornetto trilogy by Edgar Wright, unconnected with the only exception being Nick Frost and Simon Pegg, and the ice cream I never actually seen in real life. And the Before trilogy is amazing, an exploration of a couple in 3 Europe set films taking place 9 years between each film, showing us where they've been since then and how the relationship has evolved. Alright, that's enough positivity, let's get negative. So these aren't all necessarily bad trilogies, but there's a movie or even 2 in here that just don't hold enough of a candle for me to really appreciate the trilogy as a whole. And if a movie's bad, more than likely it's not going to make it to 3 anyways. The Matrix is one of my favorite action movies, period. I enjoyed Reloaded well enough, but Revolution just didn't do it for me. Despite being the shortest of the trilogy, it felt like the longest, and even though I enjoy Reloaded, I didn't really find myself invested to the story much, so Revolution being a direct sequel, you can imagine I was just disinterested. I don't know, neither of these sequels really came close to the original for me. 1.5 out of 3. Just like the Cornetto trilogy, the Cloverfield movies are not connected to each other directly. They're not in the same universe, but very different movies. The first one's a found footage monster movie, the second one is a claustrophobic slow burn thriller, and the 3rd one is an alien-esque space horror. In the Cloverfield paradox, that 3rd movie really is rough. The story clearly wasn't meant to be a Cloverfield movie at first and tries way too hard to connect the dots in the movies before being a movie on its own. There's some pretty solid body horror, but there's not enough time spent with the characters for anything to really stick with me. The first 2 movies are much better. 2 out of 3. Now while I only have 2 examples for this section, there's a lot of lackluster trilogies in the next one, and that's the So there's 3-parters within larger franchises, and I thought I'd talk about the good and the bad in them. First up, we have the X-Men movies. The first 3 movies naturally are its own trilogy, and while X-Men 1 and 2 are pretty decent, albeit pretty dated, the 3rd film is very silly in a bad way and really dropped the ball on what could have been a solid 3-part of the pre-MCU comic book era. Also, isn't it crazy that this entire trilogy doesn't have a director? Don't look that up. 2 out of 3. The X-Men films also sort of have a prequel trilogy in First Class, Days of Future Past, and Apocalypse. People bring up this clip from Apocalypse a lot.
At least we can all agree the 3rd one's always the worst.
It's been overdone, but man, it really is ironic. Because First Class and Days of Future Past are great. Really good films that were laying the foundation for Apocalypse to be fantastic with being a full-blown origin for the X-Men team. But man, it turned out to be such a drag to get through with a villain who didn't feel deserved when in comparison to the others in the trilogy, lackluster characters, and just overall disappointing. 2 out of 3. But then we have a rare case when the first movie is the worst. The X-Men Origins Wolverine, the Wolverine and Logan effectively being the Wolverine trilogy. Origins is a movie that was actually supposed to start its own little sub-franchise, with the next movie supposed to be X-Men Origins Magneto, but this movie's failed reception led to all that being scrapped, with the following Wolverine movies dropping in 2013 and 2017 and pretty good reviews, with Logan being my favorite. Funny enough, I don't think this was intended to be a trilogy. I think it's just that they made 3 different Wolverine movies. The Wolverine and Logan are definitely more connected, with being directed by James Mangold, but honestly, I don't think this was the plan at all. 2 out of 3. Alright, it's time to talk about that franchise. No, not you, not yet. The MCU is really its own thing, but inside of that thing are a bunch of different trilogies. So far we have Thor, Iron Man, Spider-Man, Captain America, Ant-Man, and the Avengers. Although I consider Endgame to be inseparable from Infinity War, so I won't count that here. Alright, let's speedrun these. Thor, Thor the Dark World, and Thor Ragnarok are all entirely different movies with different directors, and it might be our weakest link here. I don't really rate any of these pretty high. Thor is okay and looks way better when you put it next to Love and Thunder. The Dark World is very boring and melodramatic, and I actually quite like Ragnarok at some point, but it doesn't really do it for me anymore. But I guess it's the best one here, even though I outgrew it. 1 out of 3. Iron Man has a strong start, a mediocre but still fun middle, and a fantastic end, which of course is the one everyone hates. Robert Downey Jr.'s performance is really the most consistent and best thing about these movies, and with 4th movies becoming common in the MCU now, I really wish he got another one. 2 out of 3. Tom Holland's Spider-Man is my favorite, not the best, but the most enjoyable to watch. Homecoming, Far From Home, and No Way Home are among my most watched MCU films. They're just insanely rewatchable and are always a good time. I actually have a video about No Way Home here. Shameless plug. 3 out of 3. Captain America the First Avenger, The Winter Soldier, and Civil War are all good movies. I like that's not only about Steve Rogers, but also his friendship with Bucky, especially in the last 2 where that's the driving force. The First Avenger is very underrated, and I recommend everyone give it another look. 3 out of 3. Ant-Man's films were ones that I was always fine with just watching once or twice and never again, but they're pretty cute, relatively low stakes, and simple. Or at least they were. Quantumania is not a good movie, and I wish that it had just been cute, low stakes, and simple, but it was just loud nonsense that I probably will elaborate on one day. 2 out of 3. I really hope that Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 can rise to Spider-Man and Captain America as a 3-for-3 trilogy, but we'll see. And how can I not discuss Zack Snyder's DC trilogy with Man of Steel, Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, and Justice League? Zack Snyder's Justice League. These of course stirred up culture ever since they've been released, and honestly, I see why. They just were so different for the time. I don't love Man of Steel, I actually came around to BVS, and Zack Snyder's Justice League is extremely well paced for a 4-hour movie. 2 out of 3. Alright, speed round. The original Indiana Jones trilogy is very sick. 3 classic adventures that also stand on their own. The first 2 Toy Stories are great, some of the best animated movies of our time, the third one being a top 3 Pixar film. And Lord of the Rings, come on, some of the most immersive adventure movies I've ever seen. It's been 5 years since I've seen any of those though, so I think it's time to take a week off work and get to rewatching them. Okay. I think that's... Oh, okay. So Star Wars is different as the movies are actually purposely broken up into trilogies, almost to the point people talk about each trilogy as its own entity. I can't really say much about them that has been said already, but it's a video about movie trilogies. I can't not talk about them. Anyways, the original trilogy is significant to blockbusters as a whole. They're fantastic films, and even though I have to find my way to the original theatrical cuts of them every time, it's always an easy watch and I love quoting them.
Boring conversation anyway. Luke, we're gonna have company!
People say Return of the Jedi is the weakest link, but honestly, I think it's no worse or better than A New Hope. As long as you agree Empire's the best, we can be friends. 3 out of 3. The prequel trilogy really truly has been overly mistreated since they released, but I'm glad to see people turned around on them. I'm not quite at the level of revisionism, but I think I only really watched the first 2 if I'm showing someone the movies, or I haven't watched the series in a long time. Revenge of the Sith inherently goes pretty hard. 1 out of 3. The sequel trilogy, man, I still have unresolved issues with the trilogy. Again, I have a video on that, but The Force Awakens is a very important movie in my film journey, and I like a lot about The Last Jedi. Most of my problems with the sequels come from that 3rd movie that really feels like a spit in the face of things that were established in the last 2. I also wish the aesthetics of this era was different from the originals and wasn't so similar. And those are the Star Wars trilogies. We could have had a Star Wars story one with Solo and Rogue One, but that series kind of burned off after Solo. So we have no choice but to go to the conclusion. Oh hey, I didn't get cut off. So what makes a trilogy? That's simple. 3 movies. What makes a good trilogy? In my opinion, it's making the first movie with the intention of making sure it's good and stands out on its own first, establish a role and characters, make sure they grow, and then in your sequel you challenge that growth, challenge your ideas, show new aspects of the world, and in the third, make sure it all pays off and wraps everything with a nice little bow. And that's really it. Movie trilogies are always going to be a thing, especially today in the age of the IP, and whether you like it or not, you at least have one string of 3 movies you hold close to your heart. This video is coming out a week before the release of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, so I hope I can add that one as a trilogy I love as well. But wait, and some that actually never make it to 3. This video is already too long. Looks like this might have to be a video on its own. Fucking sequel bait.
Disse A por nosso amor, eu disse B, brandosa e